Hello and welcome to Energy Extra. Today, myself and Louise Purcell, who is enjoying the sunshine of Lake Garda, are joined by Mark Stevens-Rowe. Mark is a meteorologist, works for the IBM Weather Company and previously was a TV weatherman. Hello Mark.
Good morning Paul, good morning Louise.
Hey Mark, can you explain to us a little bit about IBM's Weather Company?
Yes, so it's a little known fact actually that IBM owns a weather company. We were actually acquired by IBM back in about 2016, and certainly over the last 3 or 4 years we've now become sort of more absorbed, as it were, into the whole machine that is IBM globally. IBM were actually already involved in quite a lot of weather projects, many of them in the energy and utilities space, and they absolutely felt that the acquisition of the weather company was a really good fit for a lot of the work that they were doing. And certainly we ourselves, as the weather company, again, we were already involved in a lot of energy and utility activities, but it's really expanded the breadth of the offering that we have now. And we're certainly talking to a lot more people within energy and utilities than we were previously. We were really focused, I suppose, on energy trading before, but now it's around energy forecasting, energy demand, price forecasting, you name it. We can provide weather data that will help organizations do that, even up to and including vegetation management.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role as a TV weatherman, and is the UK weather changing significantly?
In fact, I was an on-camera meteorologist for the Weather Channel in its brief incarnation over here in Europe back in the mid to late 1990s. Unfortunately, after a couple of years of trying to make drizzle sound exciting, they decided that it wasn't really a viable financial option. And of course, everything's now gone online. So there is a mechanism now whereby you can watch forecasts through the Weather Channel for the United Kingdom, but it's not a sort of a full 24/7 operation like we had back then. Certainly, as far as the weather in the UK is concerned, there's a lot of evidence, and even the UK Met Office are publishing a lot of papers now that show we are seeing more extreme weather. I mean, that is the simple fact. I think most people would notice even this past year, you know, we went from, in fact, one of the wettest and mildest winters ever recorded to having an absolute drought in a lot of places. Some parts of the country didn't actually record any rain whatsoever during the month of May, and you know it was certainly one of the sunniest April, May, and even June's combined that we've ever seen, and that following hard on the heels of that awful weather that we had during the winter. So it's really kind of chopping and changing, moving from one extreme to the other in a way that we certainly haven't seen, I suspect, in the last sort of 50 to 100 years.
Recently, we were speaking to Helen Gay-Laidlaw of SP Energy Networks, and she was telling us that for DNOs, the growth and controlling the growth of vegetation is a very expensive business. And also, she was gathering evidence because she believed with climate change, the growth rates were changing. In fact, some species of trees were growing quicker and needed cutting more often than they did in the past. Have you got a view on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, again, that sort of extreme weather is definitely impacting vegetation. I know some of the work that I've seen that's been done by the Royal Meteorological Society, of which I'm a fellow. They actually look at the sort of kind of official start dates of seasons. And we've absolutely seen that spring, for example, seems to be starting earlier. Summer and autumn, you know, kind of keep on expanding as well, and that clearly has an impact on the vegetation at the end of the day. So we are really seeing the vegetation respond to that. I think people anecdotally notice in their gardens certain species of flowers are coming up earlier and maybe doing really well. And of course, conversely, there may be some vegetation, some so-called natural vegetation from this environment that's probably not doing so well. I think we're all being encouraged in our gardens these days to try and bring in the drought-resistant plants to avoid having to water them. But for sure, the trees, which of course are a problem if you're managing an overhead cable network, they are responding in the same way. They are tending to hang on to their leaves that much longer than they used to do. And that does certainly present an issue as well, because trees that are holding their leaves are much more likely to fall over, in very high winds. So if you get a combination of a relatively early storm in the autumn or early winter season and trees actually still being in full leaf, you're much more likely to end up having a problem. So I'm not surprised that Scottish Power are looking into this very closely.
Recently, the UK has been experiencing some very strong summer storms. Do you see these causing problems with trees falling onto power lines, etc.? And how can you help?
Yeah, well, what we actually provide are a number of different services. We certainly provide effectively an operational decision support service whereby really localized weather can be understood. Our colleagues at the Met Office, who we work with very closely, and we actually have ourselves a lot of their data within our systems, they tend to provide warnings that really sort of blanket an area. So the whole of Western Scotland, the whole of Northwest England is given a weather warning. Now, one of the things that we do is to sort of kind of try to bring that down to a hyper-local level and really identify only those parts of the country that are actually likely to experience that very severe weather. Very often it's the coastal regions, of course, that tend to experience some of the highest wind speeds, but certain weather conditions can bring those really strong winds further inland as well. But you really only want to be advised of a severe weather event if it's actually going to impact you and cause you to start making expensive and time-consuming decisions, particularly as a network operator. So we're really trying to focus on the area of interest for you specifically and tell you just when those conditions are going to be exceeded in your particular area. And certainly in terms of the vegetation, we're now offering a service which can really kind of improve the return on the investment, if you like, of a lot of the services that you may already have. Most of these grid operators probably already have a pretty good digital representation of their network, very often consisting of high resolution digital imagery. Now, this is one of the benefits now of being part of IBM. Its image recognition technology means that we can analyze this sort of digital information in a common platform that we have that ingests geospatially coded data. And of course, weather is a very good example of that as well. And effectively what we can do is then identify where the vegetation is growing, if you like, the most strongly, where you're much more likely to be having a potential issue in the future with the vegetation, and allow you to then make a decision that I'm going to cut this part of the network right now because that's the part of the network that's the most susceptible. I'm perhaps not so much working on the cycle basis as we used to do in the past, whereby we would decide that, yep, last October, we cut that section of line, so now we're going to go back and do it again. If you don't need to do it, don't go and do it. But if you do need to do it, we can tell you when and where you actually need to go out and cut that vegetation back.
The DNOs have to justify spending with the regulator. So where they might have got away with cutting vegetation 3 or 4 times a year, because of climate change, it might have to be every 2 years. Would you be able to assist them with this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can clearly archive a lot of the data. It keeps a digital footprint, if you like. Interesting, actually, one of the other use cases is around ensuring that work has actually been done. So we are essentially collecting satellite data, and we're not doing this, literally every week. It's not the same sort of satellites that take the pictures for the weather forecast, if you like. But there are a set of satellites out there that can provide imagery down to sort of 50 and 60 centimeter resolution. So by analyzing that kind of imagery and updating that, during the growing season, you can actually check back and see, has this work been done that we expected to be done? Many of these network operators may actually employ contractors, and they're clearly, relying on them to feed back to them that the work has been done to the required level. And essentially, this can almost be like a check that actually has been done. And of course, sometimes it may have been done, but we can then actually show, well, it's growing back even quicker. So you've actually got to go back and do it again. So that's a system that is able to be updated much more frequently, particularly with the national grid operators who may only be able to run these sort of kind of visualizations on their network in the past, perhaps every 3 years or so. So if you can update it that much more frequently, you've got a much better way of capturing vegetation that's likely to be a problem on your network.
How is the COVID-19 situation affecting you and your customers, Mark?
Clearly, COVID-19 has impacted the entire world. Some people less than others. For us personally at IBM, interestingly, a lot of our sales and sales support teams were already working remotely. So it's not massively affected, if you like, the way in which we work. But certainly we're already hearing that our customers are absolutely being affected by that. And I think anything that can help them essentially do their jobs, that much more safely is definitely going to be a help. One of the issues around operational decision support and weather, of course, is trying to avoid too many of those occasions when a little bit of the crying wolf, if you like. Certainly some of the operators I've spoken to have found in the past that they do tend to wind up their operation to respond to a heavy snow event, a strong wind event that actually ends up not being anywhere near as bad as originally advertised. Now, of course, they always want to be in position to respond to the events when they do happen, but we can certainly show that we are actually minimizing those so-called false alarm rates. In fact, a lot of the work we've done with some of our North American companies we work with, we're bringing those false alarm rates down to less than 1%. And if every time you have to try to ramp up your operation, you're looking at potentially spending a couple of £1 million, euros, dollars, whatever, avoiding a few of those during the year certainly adds up. And of course, it reduces the exposure of the crew to the risk of contracting COVID-19, either from themselves or potentially, I suppose, even from members of the public that they might have to interact with.
The industry is fully engaged in decarbonisation, and I was reading you have been to some of the coldest places on the planet, and as a meteorologist you can see that protecting the ice caps is vital. Can you tell us your professional view on this?
I was very, very fortunate in my youth, some 30 years ago now, to actually spend 2.5 years in Antarctica with the British Antarctic Survey. And I think one of the scary things that certainly brings it home to me now is when I see pictures of the guys and girls that are going down there now, of the locations that I went, where glaciers that were sort of on the front doorstep of the base, as it were, have retreated. They've almost disappeared in some cases, and snow cover that was absolutely permanent down at sea level is now not so permanent anymore and is melting out during the summer seasons. The Antarctic Peninsula, where I spent a lot of my time, is one of the most, if you like, sensitive to climate change places on the planet. And there's over the years been a lot of news about various ice shelves there breaking up. Some of those ice shelves, the size of New York, the size of Belgium, the press likes sometimes to exaggerate these things, but there clearly has been an enormous loss of ice in Antarctica. And when you look at the planetary system, the Arctic and the Antarctic are the places in the world that effectively balance the climate. All that excess heat that we get in through the tropics, it actually has to go out through the polar regions. And one of the sort of the most sensitive areas here in the Northern Hemisphere, up in the Arctic, is around the sea ice. And this year, specifically, we are now running at the lowest ever recorded levels in the Arctic for sea ice coverage. Not just the area of the sea ice, but actually, if you like, the volume of ice as well, because the ice isn't very thick. There used to be a lot of multi-year ice. You could find ice that was many meters thick, perhaps 4 or 5 seasons old in the Arctic. And now the amount of that very old ice has reduced to the point that the thinner ice, the only 1 or 2 season ice, just melts out. And just this past year, we've seen temperatures unbelievably reaching 38 degrees right in the far north of Siberia, which again, I think a lot of my colleagues doing the serious science have clearly shown that would have been impossible without the sort of kind of climate change, man-induced climate change that we've seen over the last 20 years. It's slightly scary stuff, and certainly I think we really do hope that the world's response to COVID-19 can really be applied in the area of climate science as well. And hopefully we're going to get a new generation of politicians that will come through and recognize that if everybody takes this decisive action, and the world has shown it can do it, you know, we really can change things and turn this around.
Mark, we hear a lot about achieving net zero, but you have actually been and seen the reason why we must achieve it, as it is vital for the climate and our way of life.
Ultimately, it's if you like, it's the mechanism that keeps the world's climate balanced. And the Arctic and the Antarctic are where all of that excess heat tends to go out. And if we start losing a lot of that ice, it really will unbalance the weather. There's very little doubt, again, I think that some of the more extreme weather that we see in the Northern Hemisphere is almost certainly down to that reduction in the amount of ice coverage in the Arctic over the last, well, particularly last sort of 15 years. It really started to disappear around about 2007. There was a step change, and it's never recovered since that point. You know, we've had the odd day or runs of days where it's got back to a normal, if you like, for the time of year. But essentially it's been running below some sort of 20 or 30 year normal for many, many years now. And we are getting to a point where there will be no ice in the Arctic, probably at all, during the summer months. And that has a huge implication for Northern Hemispheric weather. It changes the energy balance in the atmosphere. It means that the jet stream, which brings us, of course, you know, rain, winds and strong winds and so forth a lot of the time. So sometimes it's seen as a bad thing. But obviously, of course, it means that our climate is typically been very equitable. You know, in the UK, we have an almost enviable climate where sometimes we do get good weather, sometimes we get rain and cooler conditions. We may well find in the future we're going to get more and more of these occasions where it doesn't stop raining and we get flooded for weeks and weeks, and then suddenly it stops raining and doesn't rain for weeks and weeks, and we get extreme high temperatures. And that's almost certainly down to that reduction in the sea ice, changing the atmospheric balances, if you like, in the Northern Hemisphere.
Mark, we've all experienced those weather forecasts where it's going to be raining or snowing, or it's going to be blowing a gale, or it's going to be glorious sunshine, and it never quite turns out to be that way. And therefore, you've got managers who are responsible for keeping the lights on, watching the weather, worrying about the weather. Does your service mean that you can accurately give them forecasts of potential problems and avoid false alarms?
We are very much about helping people make better decisions, ultimately. We've moved away from just a pure weather forecasting company, if you like, over the last few years. And again, that integration into IBM gives us that opportunity to become much more of a decision support organization. And certainly in this space, it's about providing customized alerting. So again, you know, I'm not particularly interested in winds gusting up to 40 miles an hour. That's a breezy day. I'm probably going to be able to enjoy my day and get on with all the things I normally need to worry about. But if I'm going to have a day where the wind's going to be gusting to 75 miles an hour and it's September, you know, the trees are still in full leaf, that's a day I want to pay attention. That's what I want to know about. I want to understand what's the chance of that happening. And that's the other thing that's really changed in weather forecasting since I've been involved in it professionally, is our ability to actually provide an element of risk, if you like, in the forecast. Forecasting will always have some degrees of uncertainty in it, certainly, you know, up until the point I retire, hopefully in the not too distant future. But for now, it's all about trying to give you an idea that, yes, we expect winds to reach 75 miles an hour, but actually maybe there's a 10% chance they could get to 85 miles an hour. Or maybe there's a 20% chance that they won't get to that 75 mile an hour figure. So by being able to assess the risk in the forecast, people can make much better informed decisions. Sometimes it's all about being as near 100% sure as you can be that the weather is going to be good. Today, for example, we're very likely to see the hottest temperatures of the year. We may well get very close to 34 degrees Celsius somewhere in the London area this afternoon. And the certainty, if you like, in that is pretty high. You know, we are looking at a greater than 50% chance of the temperature exceeding 33 degrees, and it's around about a 20% chance of it exceeding 34 degrees. That's coming because of all the different weather models that we have access to. So we can build this ensemble of forecasts, and we can do the same, of course, for wind. We can do the same, of course, for snow amounts and so forth. And it really does provide the most detailed information possible in the hands of the people that have to make the decisions, sometimes very complex and expensive ones. And they want the best possible and the most local weather information to be able to do that.
I suppose with the dramatic and ever-changing patterns of weather, your service is going to be required more and more.
Again, we're constantly seeing the weather impacting our customers. We look at ways in which we can improve the way in which we present the forecasts to them all the time. And our decision support platforms are constantly evolving. We love to get customer feedback. We're working with one of the biggest Italian grid operators right now, for example, who are effectively looking at a system that's going to be monitoring their assets around the entire world. Of course, many of the companies we talk to these days are not just focused on a single country. They may well have business units now operating all around the world. Anybody who owns an organization, for example, today that has assets in Florida is currently getting very twitchy about a tropical storm that literally in the last couple of hours has now spun up into a hurricane, which is a little bit earlier than the models were suggesting it was going to do yesterday. So being able to inform people of this, giving them a platform and a system which can help them visualize the weather and be alerted to those triggers on the weather wherever they are in the world is absolutely critically important. And it's always been a mission, I think, of the Weather Company to help keep people safe and inform in the best possible way that we can.
Thank you, Mark. That was absolutely fantastic. And thank you for putting some flesh on the bone to why we are all working so hard to achieve net zero. We look forward to seeing you at ENERGYxtra 2020. And thank you for your time today. And anybody who wants to see you at ENERGYxtra 2020, you'll be there to talk about the weather, which is a very British thing to do. However, in this case, it's really, really important. So, cheerio. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Louise. Yeah, it's been great to have this opportunity to talk about the weather. As you can tell, I'm quite enthusiastic about that, and I'm really looking forward to Chester in November and meeting people face to face again finally. And hopefully we'll still be enjoying some relatively mild weather. Certainly Novembers in the last few years have seen something of an extension of autumn rather than early winter. So let's hope that continues.
Hi, Mark. I hope you're right about the weather in November. If it's half as hot as it is here today in Lake Garda, it'll be a cracker.